Okay, good morning, or good afternoon in your case. Welcome to Talking Smart, conversations with educators and philosophers from around the world. Today's guest is Arthur Wolf, and Arthur has been involved with philosophy for children for many years. He's a recent Ph.D. Graduate from UBC, University of British Columbia. He's worked in philosophy for children, like I said, for some time. And he's also a scholar of the French philosopher Deleuze. And I want to talk a little bit with him about Deleuze and his philosophy, and then move into talking about how P4C can become and is becoming a curriculum rather than a series of episodes that are relatively unconnected. So, welcome. Tell us a little bit about Deleuze for a person who knows the name, but not much more about him.
Well, first of all, thank you, Mort, for inviting me and for that very kind introduction. I really appreciate what you're doing also with this whole series to put P4C on the map and get people together and providing this platform. So thank you very much for that. Yes, Deleuze is tricky to explain. I remember encountering his work and thinking, what is he writing about? It has a very strange way of writing, and many people tend to say, well, why would we read that? How does that relate to daily life? But what I found when I stuck with him and kept working on him was that he has a way of drawing on different disciplines in philosophy that open up the way we think about especially difference and becoming. Yeah. Those are two of the key terms in his work. And he does that in such a way that I hadn't really seen before in other work. Although, of course, he builds on the work of previous philosophers, and somebody like, for example, Martin Heidegger was already looking at ways that we could think differently, and he takes those ideas further. Okay. That would be the basic introduction, I would say.
Oh, okay. Well, that's helpful, and I have taken an effort to look at Deleuze, but I haven't been persistent, and so he is challenging to kind of figure out. But even narrowing down the idea of looking at those two areas and being, becoming, and
difference.
Yes. That actually helps narrow the topic for me too a little bit. A window to understanding. Well, I know from chatting with Susan Gardner that I think that's the program that you were involved with, a summer program in Vancouver. Tell us just a little bit about that program, and then how that's going to. Then we'll go on to talk about how that leads into the philosophy as curriculum. Philosophy for children, I should say.
Yes. So the summer program is actually a summer camp. Usually a camp begins on Monday morning until Friday afternoon. It's a daily camp, so the children, they go home in the evening. They're usually picked up around 4:30, between 4:30 and 5. And it's a full day camp, a full week camp. Mm-hmm. And usually we run about 2 or 3 camps at the same time in a week, and then 2 weeks in a row. So the children can go through at least 2 different themes every summer. And the youngest participants, usually around 5-6 years old, until about 12 years old. And then we also have like a leadership program for those, because now actually we have many children who've been with us for quite a while, but now they're 12, 13, or 14, and they still want to join. So we invite them to sit with us and help with the design of the curriculum, and they pick up the skills, the capacities to work as a facilitator and see a bit what is actually going on behind the curtains.
Oh, yes. So So, and how is that different, from this idea of a curriculum? What are you, what are the parameters for establishing a curriculum? I guess my experience is that curriculum tends to be handed down, and now you're inventing a curriculum. So, talk about that a little bit.
You're raising a key issue. That's a wonderful question. Yes, the handing down of a curriculum. Yeah. So this, of course, we could start by saying that any time we make a curriculum, we are already handing down something. So that is the first choice we have to make. That is something we already do. But of course, we try to do that in a way where we think we are able to engage with the questions the children themselves come up. Now, of course, that is important, first of all, but how do we do that? So like I mentioned, we do have themes. So a camp might be called the Transformers or the Metamorphs, for example, so that the idea of change comes back throughout the week and activities are related to that. So that when children, for example, when we do a story or a game or a handicraft activity related to this topic, the questions, the problems that come out of that are used for philosophical inquiries.
Okay. Now, but that's, yeah. So you pick a theme and then you allow, you plan maybe some initial activities to ferret out the possible sub-themes and things that the students are interested in. And then you build this as you're going along. It's created it's a work in progress as it unfolds. Now, okay, maybe this is a leap here, but now that's a great summer camp activity. But can this be transformed into a elementary or secondary middle school curriculum?
Yes, well, thank you for making that leap. That's a very good leap. And actually, that is really how we see the connection. So the camps, of course, are only 5 days, but you could say that is a mini curriculum, because during those 5 days, we can only talk about very few topics, but you can stretch these topics, of course, throughout the year and have a year-long curriculum, because the problems that you deal with, the problems that I think all of us who are engaged in philosophy for children deal with, they are problems about which philosophers have been writing, thinking for many years, and there is so much that we can draw on to develop a curriculum that, of course, a 1-year curriculum even would not be enough. So I see the camps as a kind of an experiment, a mini curriculum that you can then extend by drawing on other philosophical sources and then finding ways to make them interesting for the children through activities, reading, or other ways.
Yeah, okay. And how is that different from taking, say, Harry Stottlemyre's Discovery, and turning that into a semester-long or a year-long curriculum? I mean, why isn't that a curriculum rather than change and morphing and whatever else you were talking about?
Yes, no, of course, Matthew Lipman's books are a wonderful basis, I think, for a curriculum. And that is, I think, what has inspired probably all of us. So I think that's a good start. But of course, Matthew Lipman's books are only one way of practicing philosophy, one way of inquiring, one way of looking into what does it mean to exist, what does it mean to be a human being. Now, it's very helpful. And I would say that some of his exercises, maybe not that we use them directly, but some of his ideas are very much part of the curriculum. But they are just one part of a larger part of different ways of inquiring.
And it seems as though with you and Susan, for example, and other people that do the camp, this is very much the work of people who have some kind of grounding in philosophy, which my experience, limited as it is that this is a challenge for ordinary teachers, and there seems to be a lot of creativity involved in that process, and a lot of pretty deep reflection. And so how does that get translated so that other teachers, especially elementary and middle school teachers, have the wherewithal to implement such an endeavor?
Yes, that is a very big challenge. It's, of course, once we have that philosophical background, we have that intuition, that sensibility, the Fingerspitzengefühl. We have a way of noticing things in the comments children make, the direction the dialogue goes, that somebody who does not have that background might not notice. However, there are, of course, ways to at least introduce teachers to these ideas, and this takes time. It takes time. So helping teachers do inquiries, looking back at them, trying to cover different topics and have, let's say, relatively simple texts that deal with concepts like freedom or friendship or love or time is one way to at least introduce it. And I think there is already a fair amount. There are quite some lesson plans out there, philosophy for children lesson plans and websites where there are philosophical questions that can be used as lesson plans that I think are at least a good introduction. But yes, you're right. This is very challenging and it takes time. And ideally, of course, this would be part of any teacher training program.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and well, and I have a sense that is beginning to happen. And I've thought about this and reflected on this quite a bit. It seems as though we are in a phase in terms of philosophy for children when philosophy for children is becoming, well, this is either the second or third generation sort of a philosophy for children, and there is, and what that what means to me is that there become different levels now of philosophy for children, and I think of Walter Cohen in terms of doing some of this work, and I don't remember where I ran across this, but I ran across a very interesting thing where Walter was teaching philosophy in Korea with, I think, secondary level students. And I just remember and this was a while back that I saw this, so my mind isn't that clear, but it seemed as though he really was able to engage students in, if not exactly a discussion of like Heidegger, really taking some of those ideas and really, it seemed to have a deeper philosophical issues that were being struggled with. Now, it seems as though that's kind of what you're about, and how's that? Talk about a little bit about that, and with your camps in the younger and the older students, and how they struggle with those issues.
Yeah, so Walter is a really good example, of course. He also works with draws on Gilles Deleuze, for example. So we definitely have that connection. And during our camps, for example, when we have a camp like the metamorphs or the transformers, it is very immersive. So the traditional idea of a P4C setting where you have a story and then a kind of analytical engagement with the text, which is still part of it, but that is just a very small part of what we do. So how do we try to expand on that? Well, for example, when the camp starts, when the metamorphs camp start, inspired by Franz Kafka, for example, and the metamorphosis, we begin with a little play. So the children, they enter the classroom, and at the end of the classroom we have a table on which I'm lying, and I'm covered with a sheet, and next to me there is another counselor, facilitator, who welcomes the children into the classroom, and they all sit down, and they're new. It's the first day at camp. There are many other children they don't know, so there's this tension, there's this nervousness in the air. So they sit down and they look at each other, a bit uncomfortable, laughing a little bit, and they see somebody under a sheet lying there on a table, and once they're all sitting down, then the counselor standing next to me begins to explain what is happening here, who I am, that I am Gregor, and I've just had a bad night, a lot of strange dreams. And then while he's talking, I drop my arm from underneath the blanket, and my arm is covered in spots, all kinds of yellow, red, green, bright colored spots. So the children, they all move back a little bit, think, oh, what's going on there? And then once he finishes his story, he says, okay, now Gregor wakes up and he finds himself completely transformed, completely metamorphed, completely changed. And then I pretend to wake up, and we have something like a mirror there, and I look in the mirror and I think, oh, what's going on here? And after a few scenes like that, I address the children and ask them, what do you think will happen to my day now? And that is the initial stimulus that comes back throughout the week. So you have them, then they are surprised, amazed, a bit shocked, bewildered. And then Gregor comes back throughout the week, and we have some other characters as well that kind of hook the children into the concepts, the problem at hand, that we then start to inquire into through various activities. Does that make a little bit of sense?
Yes, it does. And sort of a little follow-up on that, and that is, do you plant seeds so that students, maybe not immediately, but maybe some of the older students at least know the existence of Kafka and the story, because to me that's the next step in terms of leading them to explore some of that stuff on their own.
Exactly. That is, you want to excite them, you want to have them to follow up on that. So yes, definitely with the older ones, you can mention that and we can talk about it. And some of them, they do look it up then, and they say, oh, I looked it up and I found that Kafka was there in Prague and German, and they want to know more. And that is, of course, what you'd like to see, because once it then actually becomes part of their curriculum in school, they've engaged with it at such a level that it probably is not that challenging for them anymore, which is good.
Yes. Well, that's really interesting, because I mean, it's I developed probably a similar technique many years ago, and probably with some seeds from Matt Lippman in the background, but I taught an introductory psychology course, which was called Affective Behavior. And it was just kind of an introduction to help kids kind of be oriented to college and whatever. And what I did is I collected a whole series of short stories. And so for each chapter, I had a short story that they read, and then just tried to explore various parts of that. And just two quick examples. I don't want to make this about me, but there was a wonderful short story by a science fiction writer, which was called The Gun Without a Bang. And it was about this guy who had developed this weapon that they used in some colony out of space. and it would be able to kill people, but it didn't make any noise. And that turned out to be a problem because the animals didn't know how to respond to that, and whoever they were killing, and then that led into Skinner and the whole business about reinforcement and all of that sort of stuff. And the other one that I remember using was Camus' what's it called? Oh my goodness, now I've forgotten it.
The Outsider, The Stranger, or The Plague?
No, it's a short story by Camus that's a part of the Kingdom and the Exile series of short stories. Anyway, Jonah or Jonas, he's the artist at work is what it's called. And it's about this artist who becomes famous, and everything is going along very well for him until he finds a growing group of followers, and then he finds out that he is actually now becoming the person that they include him in their art, and this totally distevels him because he now becomes an object. And how does he deal with? And anyway, it's a grand social short story, and so that's kind of similar to what you're doing with except I like the way of starting that with a play and activating that. So now I don't know if I have the next question because that's a very exciting and have you any ideas about trying to introduce this into elementary school as a year-long project?
Yes, so that's what I'm working on now, how to extend such a curriculum, what would that look like? But then it also comes back to your earlier question, to that sensibility.
Yeah.
So it would mean, even for the camps, for example, normally we start really 1 year ahead working on the curriculum. So this is not, there is a sense of openness to the curriculum, but it's very well thought through as well. Not in the sense of that all the answers are there, but even having just a general theme means there are, of course, so many directions you can go to just discuss, okay, what are some of the directions and what are some of the philosophical problems related to that? And how might we engage with those problems? What do we need to read for that? Test it out, to actually try out CPI's communities of philosophical inquiry amongst ourselves, to think it through and try it out and see what kind of things come up, try out some of the activities. And that already takes a lot of time. So I think for teachers, this is, of course, also very challenging. So to change that to a year-long curriculum would mean writing out more of these activities and how it relates to the philosophical context, because I think that's really one of the big challenges. You can almost say that the theory practice kind of gap, where you have these are the activities, that's all fun, the kids will have fun, but how does that relate to the philosophical background? Can you make that work, and can you, of course, get that across to teachers as well?
It almost seems as though what an ideal situation would be a philosopher and an elementary school teacher working together as a team to do this, and of course that opens all kinds of other problems, but it certainly would be an opportunity to enrich the elementary school and middle school teachers to a whole different way of thinking about what they're up to.
I think the idea of a philosopher in residence, for example, where you can really take your time and you can show that many of the philosophical ideas can be connected to what is already there in the curriculum. So if you have civics, for example, or other courses, you can already bring a lot, you can already use what is there to introduce some forms of philosophy for children, so that for teachers, they do not have to work on a whole new or extra curriculum.
Yes, 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 yes. I think that, and getting the philosophers in residence is a big challenge.
Yes. I
Both,
agree.
both conceptually and economically. I think there are two issues that are related to that. And yes, well, this is absolutely fascinating. I think this is a uh, uh, and I like the direction that that your work is moving in. And how is this being received? I saw, looking at your little bio, about the involvement with UNESCO and getting philosophy. Is that, those ideas kind of receptive on an international basis too? Are you making inroads there?
I think they are. There was, of course, the famous UNESCO Philosophy School of Freedom publication, I think 2007, so around that 2007, 2008, about 15 years ago. And there's the UNESCO chair in philosophy for children as well now in France. But I think also, just when my experience in South Korea, Japan, or even now in West Africa, for example, people are interested in a program that helps children deal with the kind of challenges they're facing nowadays. So, of course, critical and creative thinking are very important, but also to show, well, how does this relate to multicultural societies, cultural sensitivity, dealing with social media, all these issues of identity politics, and all these questions that children from a very young age have access to now online through all kinds of channels. And then to show that such a program actually helps children to be more careful, think through these things better, then I think that is where philosophy for children really really can do something. And this is something that I think teachers and parents are also interested in. But of course, it's very challenging, and you need to keep on trying to find ways to formulate how it really helps to do that.
So are you currently working on how to figure out AI and the production of stories from AI as a one of your uh, inventions for the curriculum?
That might be an interesting project, yes, to try that. Um, what I am doing now, one of the project is working with local stories here, actually, in Ivory Coast.
Oh,
So
yes.
in here now with a school, it's quite a large school, about 6,000 students, and one of the teachers there, he's very interested in philosophy for children and the potential it has, and he's been showing me local stories, and we've just begun to see if we can do something with those stories and turn that into a curriculum.
Yes, yes. Well, this is really an aside, but maybe we can use this as kind of a summary in some ways too, because I try to watch the clock to not go too much over a half hour. But anyway, I was thinking about the history of psychoanalysis. And one of the, Ellenberg, I think is his name, has a really interesting book on that. And he begins really with witch doctors in magic. And how that really is connected to psychotherapy. And it's a rich context, because magic is not, from his perspective, is not something supernatural. It's about working through a whole belief system and figuring out how that belief system can be curative or detrimental. And again, I thought about that because of the African connection, because that's at least a rich tradition of that kind of medicine, which I think has really deep connections to real medicine, at least on a mental level. So, and so I guess I'm just saying that really sounds like those stories sound like a really rich place to begin. Any comments on that as we kind of try to pull this together?
Well, to then also bring it back to Deleuze and what I also call an affective conception of thinking, which I think is what Deleuze develops. An affective conception of thinking would also mean that we cannot just assume that we know what thinking is and say this is our, let's say, P4C, PWC. People have different names for it, and say this is what thinking is, and this is what we impose on children. That formulation itself already, the imposition is already a problem. And this is why I try to work from that idea of an affective conception of thinking, where I always try to be open to these different ways of being. Or recently also an article I wrote with Barbara, where we say that, for example, Heidegger, he said that the teacher has to be more teachable than the students. And especially when you're trying to work across context, to try to be open, to be ready, to be in a way shocked into thinking, to change your own perspective on what you're doing and try to go with it and see what kind of new idea might come out of that. It's very challenging, but to me that is really the way for me to take this forward.
Okay, well that